Hi, thank you, Jose, for welcoming and giving me this great opportunity to participate in the Wireless Technology Summit being hosted by 5G Americas. I am Kurleigh Prescod, Executive Officer for Technology and Engineering here at the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. We are the telecommunications and broadcasting regulator, ensuring open and fair competition, as well as the management of spectrum here in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a country in the Caribbean. And it is my deep honor to be able to discuss developments as it relates to fifth generation technology, or 5G, as ongoing here in Trinidad and Tobago, and what we can look forward to with the introduction of 5G in our country. Our agenda for this afternoon: first, we'll provide an overview of the Trinidad and Tobago broadband market. Secondly, we will present our overall regulatory framework, which we use to manage the introduction of 5G in Trinidad and Tobago, starting with our overall spectrum management framework. Moving on to our developing 5G framework, which looks at the accommodation of fifth generation mobile and fixed technology in our telecommunication sector. Then we look at our revised spectrum plan that we're currently reviewing under public consultation for public mobile telecommunication services, what we refer to as PMTS. We then look at what interest has been shown, what we've been observing now that 5G technology has become available. And the first of the two areas we'll be looking at would be the introduction or the growing prominence of mobile satellite services and non-terrestrial networks, possibly entering Trinidad and Tobago in the near future. And we are also receiving a lot of interest around private networks, the introduction of private LTE or 5G networks here in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's our agenda that we'll be discussing this afternoon, to give a flavor of what's happening in the world of 5G. So as indicated, our Trinidad and Tobago broadband market is quite robust, quite mature. For a population of 1.4 million people of Trinidad and Tobago, we have well over 100% penetration, actually 150% penetration in mobile services. We are a market which possesses two mobile operators, TSTT and Digicel, with Digicel being a pan-Caribbean operator, TSTT being our incumbent telecommunications operator here in Trinidad and Tobago. And between these two mobile operators, they've happened to surpass 99% population coverage using 3G technology, using third generation technology. What's more, in the past 5 or so years, they've been able to achieve upward of 75% population coverage using fourth generation LTE technology, or LTE advanced technology. And as you can see, the coverage maps for each of the operators sourced from either the GSMA coverage map website or from one of the operators, Digicel Trinidad and Tobago's website, we see coverage is somewhat ubiquitous across both markets, both islands, I should say, which comprise the Trinidad and Tobago market. From a broadband perspective, we have a broadband penetration rate of over 90% of homes subscribed to broadband services, a fixed broadband service, whether wired or wireless. And of our mobile subscribers, we have 62% mobile internet penetration. So over 60% of our mobile subscribers also have access to mobile data. So as you can see, a fairly mature market. A little room to grow from a broadband penetration perspective, a bit of room to grow from a mobile internet penetration perspective. And when you look at the number of mobile customers or mobile subscriptions we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, which roughly estimates around 1.9 to 2 million subscriptions, mobile subscriptions, that remaining 30 to 40% of mobile subscribers that require internet, still correlates with quite a number, a few 100,000 subscribers still to subscribe to mobile data. And we do have a 5G deployment here in Trinidad and Tobago, though a micro deployment. So with the development of a new government-owned industrial estate, there has been a deployment of 5G on that industrial estate by one of the mobile operators in Trinidad and Tobago. So we do have a taste of 5G here, but it's not widespread and it's not ubiquitous or widely available to the general public. It will only be available to those users that are based on that particular industrial estate. So this provides an overview of the Trinidad and Tobago market, where we are on mobile, where we are on broadband penetration. And next we look at the regulatory framework that we will be adopting to support the introduction of 5G. So as I indicated during the agenda, first is our overarching spectrum management framework, which speaks to our overall approach to spectrum management, which will cover how we manage and treat with spectrum applications and assignments across all bands for all services. Then we narrow in on our 5G framework and talk about what we're doing there to accommodate 5G in Trinidad and Tobago. Following up from the 5G framework would be our PMTS spectrum plan. So of course, 5G can be used to deliver both mobile services and fixed broadband services. The primary or predominant use case being mobile services, 5G mobile. So we'll talk about our PMTS public mobile telecommunications services spectrum plan and how we're updating that spectrum plan to accommodate 5G. And of course, the last instrument that we'll use to regulate 5G would be our broadband wireless access, which is our term for fixed wireless access spectrum plan. So this would speak to how we'll be accommodating fixed wireless access services, the spectrum plan to accommodate those fixed wireless access services here in our market. So this is the overarching framework that we'll be using to support the introduction of 5G. So looking at the revision of our spectrum management framework, this would have stemmed from our original spectrum management policy, which was published in 2005 as our recommendation for spectrum management policy. In 2021, we realized it was more than apt, it was more than due for us to relook and update this particular framework. So we commenced a consultation to update our spectrum management framework in October 2021. In October, we'd have started the first of 2 rounds of public consultation. The second round would have taken place around July 2022. And by the end of last year, actually more specific, by October of 2022 of last year, we'd have completed 2 rounds of public consultation, receiving contributions from the major mobile operators here in Trinidad and Tobago, many spectrum users, and most notably 5G Americas, providing input on our overall approach to manage spectrum. And coming out of those 2 rounds of public consultation and reviewing and amending that framework, that proposed framework based upon the feedback, we have revised and published our updated spectrum management framework on the 31st of October 2022. And this framework can be found on our website at tatt.org.tt. With this spectrum management framework revised, the next step would have been to develop our 5G framework based upon the principles of that revised spectrum management framework. So what are those principles? The first of those principles would be to allocate spectrum to the highest value use. And of course, the highest value use does not only entail the highest price or the highest commercial price for the spectrum, but that value, which would give us the highest economic benefit for the assignment of that spectrum. So we don't only look at the largest price we can get for the spectrum, although that is a consideration, but we also look at the end use of that spectrum in terms of what will provide the most economic benefit to the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Once that highest value use has been identified and the spectrum has been allocated, the second principle will be to enable that spectrum to move to its higher value use. So it's one thing to allocate it, but now we also want to incentivize and to create the signals which will allow that spectrum to be assigned to its highest value use, as identified earlier. The third principle would be, as far as possible, to adopt a light-handed approach. In other words, to encourage market principles to determine, exactly what use the spectrum is put to use, how the spectrum would be assigned based on general market principles. Understanding, of course, there are times we would have to make some intervention for the wider public good, but for the most part, to adopt a light-handed approach to allow the industry and for users to find the best use of its spectrum. The fourth major principle is to promote certainty in the use of the spectrum for our spectrum users while being flexible. So, and while it may sound like contradictory concepts, the intention is to allow or to adapt our spectrum management principles based upon what the market is seeking. So that's the flexible aspect, not to be rigid, not to say, well, this is what our frequency allocation table says. So to adapt, while also once we make an assignment or we make an allocation, provide a certain level of certainty to our spectrum users, to our licensees. Our fifth principle is to balance the cost of interference against the benefits of greater utilization. And basically this speaks to us looking to employ as much as possible spectrum sharing techniques to ensure the spectrum is used as efficiently as possible. So yes, when you have more than one use for the spectrum in a particular band, you may have some measures of interference, but the question is, what level of interference can a particular use tolerate and still operate successfully while allowing other users to enter that band? And this speaks to our approach to being more flexible, okay? So it's not just a case of once we've assigned spectrum, it's exclusively for that person, but to also to see, hey, are there opportunities for us to share that spectrum across multiple users? And our final principle for spectrum management, as per our revised spectrum management framework, would be to harmonize our use of that spectrum with regional and international allocations. So again, we don't want to adopt spectrum allocations that are inconsistent with what spectrum users can find across, but specifically allocations and use cases as well. So this touches on our revised spectrum management framework. And with that spectrum management framework defined, we now look at the development of our 5G framework, which is specific to the introduction of fifth generation technology in Trinidad and Tobago, based upon those principles of spectrum management. In that regard, we commenced the development of that 5G framework via a pre-consultation process in 2021, where we published I should say we prepared and distributed a discussion paper for review and comment by our major stakeholders. With that feedback, we can commence the first round of public consultation of our 5G framework in July 2022, with comments received from the major mobile and broadband operators here in Trinidad, as well as 5G Americas. That round of consultation would have completed in August 2022. We would have gotten those comments, reviewed those comments, and prepared responses and decisions to those comments in what we call our decisions on recommendations matrix. And we would have attached that decisions of recommendation matrix to our revised document for a second round of public consultation. That second round of public consultation would have commenced in January of 2023, so just a few months ago, and would have ended in February 2023. So on the 24th of February 2023, that round of consultation would have closed. We would have received comments from a number of players. So at this stage, we're now reviewing those comments with the intention to publish an updated decisions and recommendations matrix based upon the comments received in the second round of public consultation. And we anticipate that we will finalize our 5G framework and have it published by July 2023. Noting that we're in April 2023 now, so we're expecting about 3 months to have our 5G framework finalized and published. So what's in that 5G framework? So here we've summarized the major policy statements of our 5G framework. Firstly, that 5G framework identifies more spectrum in our low bands, in our mid bands, and in the higher bands, also referred to as the millimeter wave bands, for the accommodation of 5G framework. So specific bands of interest were identified in that particular framework, as the bands will be looking to accommodate both mobile and fixed 5G services, or mobile and fixed services that use 5G technology, I would say. In that policy, in that 5G framework, we also issued a policy statement as it relates to the upper C-band in the range 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz, where we've said at this time we will not look at that band for the accommodation of 5G, given that we have existing television receive only, commercial television receive only, also known as TVRO, and VSAT systems, very small aperture terminal systems, operating in those bands, as well as we're aware of the concerns from the civil aviation sector as it relates to altimeter use and interference to airplane altimeters in the band just adjacent to this upper C band, that 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz band. However, while we deferred the use of that upper C band for 5G now, we've also said we will explore and we will engage the respective operators to see in the medium to long term whether or not at least a portion of this band can be allocated for mobile and fixed services that utilize 5G technology, mindful of what's happening in our neighboring jurisdictions. Thirdly, based upon comments that we got from the first round of public consultation, we've outlined our approach to deal with the allocation of the upper 6 gigahertz band as it relates to whether we look at allocation for unlicensed / license exempt / Wi-Fi 6E, Wi-Fi 7 use, or for international mobile telecommunications use, or IMT use, or mobile use, as they would say. So, based upon, interest and, counter responses received on that particular upper 6 gigahertz band, we've outlined our approach as to how we will allocate that band for these particular services. What we've identified is that the lower portion of the 6 gigahertz band has been globally identified for the most part for license exempt, unlicensed, class licensed use. So in this regard, we have, taken the position and, as part of our 5G framework, that the lower 6 gigahertz band can indeed be considered, can be allocated. We propose to allocate the lower 6 gigahertz band for the accommodation of unlicensed, license exempt, class licensed services to accommodate Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7. In the short term, while we continue consideration, so we continue to consider whether the upper 6 gigahertz band can be allocated for Wi-Fi 6E or for mobile use. And this speaks to our approach about balancing, interference with the benefits of shared use. So this is where we're looking to, accommodate multiple services within the band rather than leaving the band only for, VSAT use or for point-to-point link use in that regard. Our fourth policy position, we're speaking to how we award spectrum, what will be the price for the spectrum. And we've identified that we will be awarding spectrum using, for services using 5G technology via direct assignment to existing operators or a combination of competitive licensing such as auction for new use and for new users. And finally, we speak to our intent to develop procedures to accommodate new sites that will be using 5G, especially if the high bands, the millimeter wave bands are being utilized, and therefore we need to deploy more sites. So in that regard, we speak to our intent in that regard to support the deployment of new sites to deploy services that use 5G technology. So that's our 5G framework. As I mentioned, the 5G framework spoke about mobile services and fixed services. So as far as mobile services is concerned, as sort of the primary or predominant use of 5G, we've already commenced the revision of our public mobile telecommunications services spectrum plan, as of this year. So the last version of that plan would have been published in 2017 as version 4 of that particular plan. But given the interest and developments as it relates to 5G and users' needs, we've commenced our consultation for the revision of our spectrum plan for the accommodation of PMTS. And that would have started in March 2023. So we would have published that revised spectrum plan for the first of 2 rounds of public consultation in March 2023. With that consultation, that first round consultation, having just completed in mid-April 2023. So with that round of consultation completed, we will then review the comments received from various stakeholders. And then based upon those comments, we either revise our proposed spectrum plan, and we'll also publish our decision on recommendations matrix, as alluded earlier, responding to the comments received from that first round of public consultation. We anticipate to publish that second round of public consultation for this revised spectrum plan in October 2023. And once we've published that document for the second round and we've gotten comments, our intention is to complete and finalize that revised spectrum plan, that would be version 5, for the accommodation of PMTS, and is anticipated to be published by latest March 2024. So in this regard, this is how we hope to revise and update our spectrum plan for the accommodation of public mobile telecommunication services. In that first round, what does the document speak to? The document speaks to increasing the mid-band allocations for our mid-band spectrum bands, our 1900 megahertz spectrum band, and our advanced wireless services or EWS band to larger band plans, namely band 25 and band 66, which would increase effectively, or I should say add an additional 30 megahertz by 2 or full duplex of spectrum for mobile services. We are also within the current band plans for low band spectrum, which is namely the 700 megahertz APT and 850 megahertz band plans. We've made more spectrum available in those bands for mobile services. So whereas previously we would have had a certain amount, like 30 megahertz times 2 of APT spectrum and 20 megahertz times 2 of 850 spectrum, we've now increased that amount of spectrum, which will be available for mobile services accordingly. We've added 90 megahertz of time division duplex, TDD, mid-band 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, as well as 190 megahertz of time division duplex, mid-band spectrum in the 3.3 to 3.65 gigahertz spectrum band. We've introduced higher spectrum caps. So we've had spectrum caps before, which will allow multiple operators to operate in the bands. We've increased the spectrum caps, and we've also introduced aggregate spectrum caps across bands for larger channel bandwidths, because we understand that 5G will require larger channel bandwidths of 20 megahertz, 25 megahertz, 30 megahertz, 40 megahertz, 50 megahertz. So if it is we had spectrum caps in each spectrum band, it would have really limited how much spectrum each operator could have had in each band. Let's say the 700 megahertz band or the 1900 megahertz band. So rather than cap each operator to only 20 megahertz, in each band, what we've said is, hey, we've grouped, we've aggregated certain pairs of bands like the 700 and the 850 megahertz band, as well as the 1900 and AWS bands. We've said your spectrum cap crosses those bands. So rather than having to have 50 megahertz in the AWS and 20 megahertz in the 1900 megahertz band, you can have a 35 megahertz spectrum cap across both bands. And you could reduce the amount of spectrum in one of the bands and increase the amount of spectrum you have in the other aggregate part of that band, so that you can have larger channel bandwidths in one of those bands that form the aggregate. So this is where we've introduced, as I said, larger spectrum caps and aggregate spectrum caps across bands. Again, we speak to our approach to assignment of that spectrum to our operators via direct assignment for certain bands to the existing operators. In the case of a new operator, obviously we'd use competitive licensing. And for the new spectrum bands coming on board, we have proposed to adopt competitive licensing as well. And finally, given the absence of demand so far for millimeter wave spectrum assignments, we've deferred the allocation of the millimeter wave bands for PMTS at this time. It doesn't mean we will not look at it in 3 to 4 years' time, but seeing that there's no demand for it at this time, we've not really done a full spectrum plan for PMTS in the millimeter wave bands, especially where our major push here in the Caribbean is really for coverage and in-building penetration, as opposed to, exorbitant capacity. And this is a diagram of our low band and mid band spectrum bands that we featured in our PMTS, our spectrum plan for the accommodation of public mobile telecommunication services. So there you see the low band, which is all the spectrum bands below 1 gigahertz, and then the mid band, which is the spectrum from 1 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz. And we've highlighted in red the spectrum bands that we propose to accommodate PMTS services here in Trinidad and Tobago, namely the 850 megahertz band, the APT 700 megahertz band, the AWS Advanced Wireless Services spectrum band found in the US, the 1900 megahertz band, also known as the PCS spectrum band, also found in the US. We talked about the 2.5 gigahertz TDD time division duplex midband, and we talked about the lower 3.5 gigahertz band that will also be looking to accommodate TDD time division duplex 5G services. As mentioned earlier, under the 5G framework, we have not at this time allocated spectrum for PMTS in the 6 gigahertz band, which is sort of the higher part of the mid-band spectrum range. It's still under consideration. All right, so this now sort of highlights our PMTS low band and mid-band spectrum bands, what we're looking at, and what has been proposed for Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, highlighted in red. So with that, we've talked about our spectrum monitoring framework. We've talked about our 5G framework, and we've talked about our PMTS spectrum plan here in Trinidad and Tobago. So now we're looking at what's coming, what we're seeing as a result of the development of 5G technology. So firstly, we received a request for authorization for ancillary terrestrial component operation in this band 53. So it's a upper 2.4 gigahertz band, just above the license exempt 2.4 gigahertz spectrum for 4G and or 5G use, whereas mobile satellite service operation currently authorized by the FCC for the US and the ISCD for Canada. So in this regard, we propose to commence a consultation, or invite comments, I should say, on whether or not low-powered mobile satellite service ATC operation should be authorized in this particular band, the 2.4 gigahertz S-band. And that invitation for comments is expected to be published in July 2023. In addition, one of the 5G standards that have been produced, 3GPP Release 17, speaks to the use of 5G for non-terrestrial networks, NTN, or or otherwise known as satellite systems, whether low Earth orbit or medium Earth orbit, MEO, or geostationary orbit. So in that regard, with that introduction of that new release, the Telecom Authority, we already started to see requests, expressions of interest, you could say, for the operation of narrowband, non-terrestrial network systems in band N256, which is that 1980 to 2010, paired with the 2170 to 2200 megahertz band. And the specific requests are surrounding the operation and the provision of Internet of Things, IoT services and applications. So in this regard, we propose to commence a consultation on the authorization of narrowband non-terrestrial network systems in 2024, specifically in the band 2000 to 2010 megahertz, paired with 2190 to 2200 megahertz. And why we've identified this particular band slot is that it doesn't overlap with our 1900 megahertz spectrum allocation for PCS or PMTS, Public Mobile Telecommunications Services. So this is what we're proposing, and we expect that consultation to commence by early 2024. And then the other area of interest that we're seeing, as I would have mentioned in our agenda, is an increased interest in private LTE 5G networks. So we are getting inquiries from various stakeholders about, private sector entities looking to deploy and operate private LTE and 5G networks. So some of the bands we're looking at the 2.3 gigahertz band. We're looking at potentially at a couple slots in the lower 3.5 gigahertz band, which has not been allocated for PMTS. We're considering a couple of spectrum slots there as well. We also note that one of the applications for the mobile satellite service ancillary terrestrial component, ATC systems that I spoke about earlier under MSS, one of the use cases are for the deployment of low power private LTE 5G networks. So that, again, that may also be a band that we could, for persons interested in deploying these systems, we can, refer to this particular band as a potential band for the deployment of low power private LTE 5G networks in these MSS ETC bands, such as band 53, or now known as band N53. So in that regard, as we commence our consultation around our broadband wireless access spectrum plan. So remember when I talked about the overall regulatory framework, I spoke about the spectrum management framework, the 5G framework, the revised spectrum plan for PMTS services, for public mobile telecom services. And then I spoke about, at that time, the broadband wireless access spectrum plan. So when we released the broadband wireless access spectrum plan, which is planned for public consultation in 2024, we definitely aim to include a section around private networks, which will allow entities aiming to deploy private networks at particular bands that they can consider deploying these systems accordingly. So that's another area of interest that we have received and that we at the Telecommunications Authority are actively working on to ensure that provision can be made for those services in this band. So with that said, that brings us to the end of our presentation in terms of what we are doing as it relates to the introduction of 5G technology for fixed and mobile services here in Trinidad and Tobago. And it also speaks to some of the emerging services and applications that we are seeing as a result of the possible entrance of 5G technology in our market, both from a private network perspective, from an ancillary terrestrial component perspective to mobile satellite services, and even direct mobile satellite services using 3GPP Release 17 specifications. I want to take this opportunity to thank you and 5G Americas for inviting the Telecommunications Authority to participate in this wireless technology summit. And we hope our contribution is useful and has provided a lot of valuable information in this regard. Thank you so much for this opportunity.